needs to be academic progress for every student. It needs to be about giving those students the opportunities to create the future that they would like to create for themselves through the education they're able to attain, and thereby giving us a great future society, because those children as students and the future leaders of our society will give us the society that we are in, we enable them to take. But the critical element is none of that happens if they're not safe. They won't learn well if they don't feel safe. In fact, we have a burden to make sure they are safe. And so thinking about school safety, taking actions to actually make schools safer and safer is critically important. And I'm grateful that this group comes together on this issue of safety, but also the support that this group has brought in the past on academic attainment and, quite frankly, the best set of choices for every single student as they seek to build the future that they deserve to build for themselves. So I'll pause at that and say thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you all for what you're willing to do. Thanks for the time you're putting in. This is something on top of something you would otherwise be doing. So thank you for the sacrifice that you are giving of yourself in order to engage in this process.
Senator, thank you, one, for not going 50 minutes. But most of all, thank you for joining us and for your support of education and all of our kids and educators over the years, from the board to the legislature. It is our state and our system, and our kids and teachers are all better off because of your support and service. So we really appreciate you as well. We're teaming up, and I believe we've got at least one person from Aurora Public Schools. I can't see everybody on the screen, but Carrie, if you can move to spotlight this group for me onto the screen, and as you each come on, I'm first just going to do a lightning round and ask you to introduce yourself and what work it is that you've done or do that connects you, and maybe in 30 seconds or less, what the underlying principle is of the model you take in responding to these different incidents. And Stacy, I'll go with you first.
All right, can everybody hear me? All right, I'm Stacy Collis. I was a school resource officer. I worked at Lakewood Police Department for about 29 years. Prior to that, 4 years at Littleton Police Department. I was the school resource officer at Green Mountain High School for approximately 18 years. I had 20 plus years. I worked in Jefferson County School District. I retired in 2018. I started a company, 2020 Safe Schools. And I also teach for the National Association of School Resource Officers within this state and around the country to teach about the transition. Where I come to as far as an approach or a method is very holistic. It is from the school community, and it expands out from there, utilizing anything within that school community. That's grocery stores, that's churches, that's businesses, neighbors. It's a very holistic type of look at this thing called school safety. It goes just beyond the active shooter to teen suicide, suicide ideology, all of these things that I looked at as far as a very holistic approach. And that's where I came to looking at school safety and making it a much broader scope than just it's the armed intruder type of situation. So that's just, I know I went over a little bit, but that's me.
I appreciate it, Stacey, and really appreciate you joining us. I think we're very intentional to make sure we get a diversity of both perspectives and experiences. So I'm thrilled to have somebody like Stacey, who was in schools and is now out of that, but is doing consulting with a lot of districts on how to improve some of these approaches. And we've got some folks that both have models in place or that are implementing different models. And I'm going to get a lot more questions about how you did things, like engaging some grocery stores and some of the other folks as you introduce yourself. We'll stay high level, but then I'm going to push to really understand how you've rolled out some of these programs. So Deputy Solano and Michelle, would love for you guys to introduce yourselves and where you fit into this whole conversation about responder models.
So we run a co-response model in the schools, and Joe is a part of that conversation as well as far as bringing it up in Thompson School District. So as you can see, Deputy Sloan and myself, we are paired together, and he is an SRO in Thompson School District, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. So we respond to crisis within the schools, any sort of mental health concerns. We respond through safety and security dispatch to assess kids for levels of care that they might need. And then in addition to that, we also on the back end do referrals for different mental health supports or welfare checks, or if a kid's missing school and they have some concerns, we get to do those types of wraparound services as well and kind of help connect the pieces where there's a gap in services or a communication barrier. We're just an extra set of eyes.
Deputy Solano, anything you want to add, or do you want to hold to it until we come back around with more questions?
Yeah, no, I'm Deputy Solano. I work for the Laramie County Sheriff's Office. Just like Michelle said, I joined the team. A lot of co-responder model programs in the community are an officer paired. And with the schools, we try specifically to have a deputy that's trained in the schools and understands the school in and out. I think Michelle did a good job of covering what our team does. And then some of the other things that's nice is just we have connections in the community. So and school's not always in session. So when school's not in session, then we're out in the community prioritizing youth calls and doing home visits, because chances are likely we have a good rapport and understanding with that family and that student, and we want them to have the best care possible.
Thank you, Deputy. Kevin, I know you're off camera right now. I'm hoping that you can jump in, and would love to understand your role now at APS, and for folks to get some context, I think it's important how long you've been there and where you came from before you were at Aurora Public Schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yep, we are good.
Okay. Yeah, I do apologize. My camera is not working for some reason. I am driving around quite a little bit, but yeah, Kevin Childs, Director of Safety and Security for Aurora Public Schools. I am in my first year at APS. Before that, I did 16 years with Cherry Creek Safety and Security District Team, and also 8 years in the military, and still in the Army, Sergeant as well. So really the approach that we're looking to take in Aurora is kind of taking the same lead that I'm hearing already, and having that dual approach to crisis situations, and working together with mental health, and trying to get us paired a little bit better with the folks that can help us in these crisis situations. So thanks for allowing me to be a part of this call, and it's kind of awesome to see what we've got going on throughout the state. So looking forward to hearing more.
There I go, being muted. Joe, we're going to get a lot more into the model and where it is and what the experience has been, but we'd love to understand your role there at Thompson, and the kind of the fundamental way of how you interact with others in that model.
Yeah, thanks. Joe Bajanski, Director of Safety and Security, Thompson School District. A little bit about me. I worked for Laramie County Sheriff's Office for about 6 years and then transitioned into this role. Kind of the purpose of it and how I helped build the program was our school counselors and social workers were suffering, whether they were waiting for co-response models that had already been entrenched in the community, but they were also supporting the community. So having one directly assigned to Thompson, not only for support and suicide risk assessments, but kind of like my team alluded to, welfare checks, but also too, they help consult on threat assessment, which has been a really big key piece for us in that prevention side and helping with training. And really just how I got it going was just starting the conversations with our first responders and our mental health providers. And then we just created a joint IGA that allowed and discussed what was happening and what wasn't, and how things were going to be paid. And that was how we got the program up and running.
Thanks, Joe. Going forward, I'm going to start digging into more about the unique aspects of the approach you all take. And I want to start the conversation to understand how you've approached different pieces, and then we'll move into what has been the outcome of that. Stacy, when we talked, you shared what I thought was a really interesting story that may have seemed small, but I think it tells a good example of community connection. And you were talking about reaching out to some stores, just about things like, hey, could you give some water? And I would love for you to share not just what that was and what grocery store, but what the thinking was behind that and what that led to in terms of the dynamics between you and your teams and parts of your community.
Well, one of the things, and I grew up as the I heard is it senator, I think, was talking about that generation. I was in the schools when Columbine happened at a middle school at that point in time. And I was prior to these co-responder models. The co-responder models are fantastic. I wish I'd had them when I was working. So a lot of this was sitting down, talking to people, and again, that holistic approach and looking at it and saying, hey, what do we have in our community? Every community is different. And what accessibility is there? Whether you're rural or you're metro or wherever you're at, you've got to look at those resources. And we looked around our school and said, hey, one of our security officers, head of security, talked to a church down the street that became our evacuation site, that they store water for us. They store hookups for our computers for a reunification. And we looked at those, and now those people actually volunteer and help us out at various events at the school and what takes place there. But we looked at the stores across the street, and it was just a matter of having a conversation and going across the street and talking to managers, talking to people over there and saying, hey, if we go to a lockdown or we go to this, would you be able to provide us water or things that we need? And they were like, absolutely. It was kind of an offshoot of this, but I had those conversations. The stores knew who I was, and it actually worked out. Kind of a nice story was I had a young lady that was having difficulty gaining money to get a dress for prom. And I just happened to make mention to a manager at the store, and they did a fundraiser for her and donated money so that she could get ready and be able to go to prom that she wanted to do. And it was just a side note of actually having that conversation, going and talking to the rec centers, going and talking to the businesses around, the community members, and doing those things. So it was that effort to say, hey, I was at the high school I was located. Second Wind came out of that because of the suicides. And, we learned that, hey, we need to talk to people. We need to gain knowledge. We need to work as a team, whether that be educators, mental health, SROs, law enforcement, but it is a whole team effort. And that's why I love seeing Brendan and Michelle and the co-responder, aspect. I would have conversations with my counselors about, hey, if you have a child that's headed this way, whether, suicide, that type of thing, I want to be brought in on it. And this is how we do that. So that's where I came from, and going to the stores and simply asking, because a lot of times I think we get fearful of, well, do I put that out there, or are they going to get upset at me? You got to ask. And the way you go about doing that and getting their involvement, and they would provide stuff for us when we did exercises, and and do that type of thing. So that's kind of where I came from. I was before the co-responder. I would have loved it, but it was from the ground up, kind of developing and saying, hey, I want this to be a whole community effort.
Thanks, Stacey. I appreciate it. And I think it is important to note that we are at kind of a new era in how schools and school districts and leaders are even, and communities are thinking about this. Kevin, I'm going to ask you to jump in, and I hope you're in a place where you can. Would love to understand from your perspective, coming out of Cherry Creek and over to APS, how you have seen a different type of model lead to different types of dynamics or relationships with the school community and with students, and how you've seen it play out for different students' reactions when there is some type of adult response.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really big into meeting a kid where he's at, right? And I will say what Cherry Creek did very great was we had mobile mental health coordinators that were available to go and help in any crisis situation. And I say any, but any escalated student, any escalated parent, we had that available. In APS, we're kind of building from the ground up, where we don't necessarily have that at the moment, but we do have some very qualified individuals to help us out. But it's not in a collaboration mode yet. So that's what we're trying to build in terms of how we respond and meeting the kid where he's at. This is just like you keep stating. This is a new world. This is a new type of situation where we're in, where we keep fighting and dealing with a lot of mental health situations. So I think it is pretty vital to have that mental health expert, so to speak, be able to help us out in those moments.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And Joe, that's a nice pivot for me with you. And you having spent time in law enforcement and now being in the role at the schools, how have you seen, before we get into what your challenges were at the system level, I'm really curious on the personal level. How has it been for you as a professional asked to respond to different incidents, whether they're disruptions or different types of threats, when you've got this expanded response team as part of your tools?
To be quite frank, it made me wonder how I did my job without them. I think we've all been in that shoe where, you wish you had more mental health training, you wish you had more security training, and then this team represents the best of both worlds. So when you have that threat assessment and something doesn't feel right, but it's not quite meeting the questionnaire, something's not there, having that immediate mental health professional, having that SRO who maybe doesn't know the kid and can see it from a 3,000-foot view, to come in and say, no, you were right, this is where we're going. Or no, Joe, I think you're kind of losing your mind here a little bit. So it's just one of those things. It added that extra level of support, not just for our kids, that's a whole other conversation because that's been incredible, but just for not only myself and my team, but also for our school counselors, our school staff, where they did an SRA on a student. And now if it was high, they're not waiting 3 hours for somebody to come and do that because they can't get a hold of parents, which is pretty common, I think, in all of our schools, but also to maybe help confirm their thinking and support them as well. So this really helped us on the personnel level, both with my team and our school staff.
Thanks, Joe. And I'm going to kind of preview for all of our panelists the next two places I want to go with the conversation. One is going to be about the students that all of you have dedicated your careers to keeping safe, physically and mentally doing well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then for the final segment of this, I want to move us into, okay, so why don't we all do this? It seems really easy and straightforward. There's no challenges. And I'm smirking a little bit, and I hope you all know that. I want to dig into it at the tail end of this. What does it really take? The heavy lift and the complexities of doing this. But let's first talk about what it looks like for students. What are the advantages, or what's been the difference you've seen? And Deputy Solano and Michelle, I'm going to go first to the two of you. What, if anything, have you seen in a difference in student response and in outcomes for students by having this blended or joint response to different situations?
I can kind of talk a little bit. So I started on the team since we started back in November of last year. But just being able to talk with the students, build rapport with the students, communicate with the families about what we're seeing, what's going on at school, and then just being able to connect them with services has been super huge. Like, that's a huge disconnect that we've had in our community, is counselors can only go so far, and they all love these kids and they like to be with these kids and do anything and everything they can for these kids, and they're very dedicated. But when it comes to services out in the community, when a kid needs something more, and for them to be able to pass them off to our team, and then our team being like, hey, this is a really good resource and this works for you, talking with the student and the family, and then just getting them enrolled in those services and getting them started. And then when they do come back into the school setting, then we do everything we can on the reentry, kind of on the backside to say, hey, how did that work for you? And then what can we do at the school level to help support you to be successful in school? I think being able to watch that process from start to finish has been amazing. Instead of, well, the counselor suggested this service, we don't know if that person attended or not, or if parents followed through. So for us to be able to do that follow-up and kind of check in with the parents like, hey, we talked about this, we haven't seen anything or heard anything, are you still planning on this or not? So being able to like keep those parents in check to make sure that they get those kids to those services that they've promised, it's been kind of a huge relief, I think, on the school side as well as our side, because we're able to connect those kids and we know for a fact that they're accessing services and getting the help that they need. We've run into parents where there's like, we don't even know where to go. I didn't think this was going to be an issue with my kid. Where do we go? I need help. Instead of doing a quick Google search and seeing what's available, then they can rely on our team and we can kind of help them through that process or get them connected with case management if something more needs to happen. I'll let Michelle kind of chip in too with what she's seen.
So I think that it is a matter of understanding that not everybody can be an expert on everything. And I think we put that a lot on teachers and on counselors to try to have to take off one hat, put on another. And this allows them to kind of pass that hat off when they're like, ooh, I have an idea, or my spidey sense is tingling that something more is needed, but I don't really know because this isn't what I do day in, day out. And the same goes for the students. It's like seeing a specialist at a doctor versus seeing your general practitioner. They get to come in and have a conversation with two people who on a daily basis deal with suicidal ideations, with homicidal ideations, with self-harm, with high level, kind of on the threat level situations were there. And so I tell kids all the time, I just told a kid now, you can say whatever, it's not going to scare me. I've heard it all. And if I haven't, I'm not going to jump away or look at you like you're an alien. We need to have a conversation about this. So I think that on the kids' side, that's the biggest way I can build rapport is just like, I'm not scared of you. I'm here to help you. And I'm not scared of your thoughts. Throw it at me and let me handle it.
I'd like to piggyback off that a little bit too, like what Michelle just described earlier today, we were working with the student and just having that student here, like, we're here to help you out. We're here to go through this with you is so relieving to the students and the families because we're taking that weight from them and we're like, we got you. We're going to follow up with you. We're going to get you taken care of. And we've seen a lot of success with our team and gotten a lot of feedback from the community about being able to do that.
Thank you. Really important points and helpful, I think, for this whole group and the other 150 who I know are going to be viewing this and catching up on the notes to understand. Kevin, I'm going to ask you to jump in. And we talked a little bit about the student response when you spoke last. You and I also had a conversation with our colleagues about what it's like when a kid sees somebody in a uniform responding and the difference between that and somebody else. So I would just love to understand what you've seen happen in the relationship with students with different responder models, and what, if anything, you've seen in the change in outcomes and student behavior over the long haul when you've seen different approaches taken to how we respond to incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, some of our kids do not respond very well. Seeing someone walk up with a badge, no matter how great our CSOs are, no matter how great our SROs can be, sometimes our kids have already made that decision in their mind of how that interaction is going to go, which makes it hard. It makes it really hard for our guys that truly do care about kids. And, we're just coming to try to help de-escalate the situation. But our communities have been through a lot. And at times, I think it's the only time they see a badge is in the news with something that's happened pretty bad. I can think of the Elijah McClain situation that happened in Aurora. It made it very, very difficult for our kids and for our parents to trust anyone with a badge, including my guys. So I think that work really does help when we get out and I challenge my guys to go see kids outside of school, go support them outside of school. That can be one of the biggest relationship pieces that can change a kid's day around and help build that trust. But that's one of our challenges, right? I'm asking them to do more than their normal 12 hours, you know, and go support a kid and try to earn that trust.
Thank you. I appreciate the candor. And I know that you mean no aspersions on anybody involved when we talk about the difference in the realities of people's lived experiences and how they live in different dynamics and situations. Stacy, I'm going to bring you back in. We're talking a lot about different co-responder models where a district has made the decision or they've had people lead them to this of having multiple professionals respond. I also need to be very understanding that not every district may make that decision. Not every district may have either the leadership, the resources, or the partners to make that happen. And I would love to understand and get some perspective from you, who you were in this space at a time when that wasn't the dominant thinking. The dominant thinking really was we had CSOs or SROs of different kinds. I would love to understand from you what you think districts in that situation, where a co-responder model either isn't what leadership is deciding or isn't practical at this moment. What are some things that you've seen be effective in the single responder model to bring an additional type of thinking to it? And whether that's de-escalation or more focus on understanding the behavioral aspects instead of just the disruptive side. How would you advise people, or what did you learn being that single responder model?
Well, the single responder model, and what I looked at was we've got to break down these barriers. We are a community, and that's the way I looked at it was, hey, were there kids that didn't like me because I wore a badge? Sure, there were. But I was relentless, going in, communicating, trying to go to events. My wife said I had the inability to say no. I was going to things and spending, a lot of time, getting involvement. And currently now I teach with NASRO, and that's what we do is we say, hey, you got to get involved. Like Kevin mentioned, you got to go to after school events. You got to break down those barriers. I had those kids that said, hey, I don't like cops. Well, I'm going to change your mind. It took a while on some of the kids, but you had to do a community effort. You had to work with mental health. Mental health had resources that I didn't have. I had resources that mental health didn't have. Education had resources, and sometimes education didn't even realize they had resources because one of the things that we looked at is talking to our teachers and saying, hey, what do you bring to the table? What is in your background? And we found there were people that had EMT or mental health training and different things that were in their midst, but the educators didn't know about it. And, we can utilize those people and coming at it from a community approach of saying, hey, we had the Federal Center not far from the high school. And they reached out to us and said, hey, would you like to train with us when we do these exercises? And then they in turn said, hey, let us come up and watch what's going on at your school and give input as far as exercises, what we can do to help out. It's all about, and I hate to sound glib on this, but it's my wife and I have been married a lot of years now, 35 years, and it's all about stinking communication. And can we communicate as a group and say, hey, I need to communicate with my education partners. I need to communicate with mental health, and to sit down and have that communication and not be at odds and say, hey, we may come from different perspectives, but we all have ideas and different things that may or may not work within an environment. And if we sit down in a meeting, put your egos at the door and say, hey, let's sit down, because it's all about the kids. And in that same sense, Barrick, we can't forget the kids. I tried to bring them involved, and Bill Robbins, who's on this, may think back to different groups that we had when we did exercises, and getting the kids involved and having them go out and say, hey, where don't you feel safe in the school? What's going on, and having them involved, because I think sometimes we forget, and it's a top down. We as adults say, okay, this is what's going to happen. Well, let's get input from the kids, because they've actually got some great ideas that we may not have thought about, when it comes to that. And to me, it goes to that communication and building those relationships. And as an SRO, that was the biggest thing when I went in. My sergeant would tell you, I was not a paper guy. Reports waited for extensively long periods of time to be done. It was all about forming those relationships and, getting out there and building that community to all work together to make it a safer place.
I appreciate that, Stacey. I think such good perspective on where students are and the different pulls that you felt. We've got a little less than 10 minutes for this conversation before we got to wrap up. There's some questions jumping onto the Jamboard that I'm going to get to. I would also, and Kevin, I'm going to go to you first, and then Joe, I'm going to go to you. This all sounds great. So why don't we all do it? It's simple to do, right? Kevin, I would love to hear from you the reality of what if another district, big or small, was looking at implementing a different type of co-responder model, whether it's yours or another. What would you tell them? Hey, really pay attention to these challenges you may expect, whether that is internal cultural issues about how people respond and who the principal defaults to calling, or the financial and the relationships that you have to have with these other professions. What have been some of the most crucial things you've overcome or are in the process of overcoming that you would tell folks, give some real attention to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing is obviously personnel. Look at your mental health personnel and see if you have the ability to have people that can be mobile. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we found, is that most of our mental health are connected to the specific schools, and we're not able to get them a little bit more mobile. The second piece is not everyone's going to respond the same way. I can tell you that we've had some challenging interactions with some of our community members. They sometimes think maybe having that model makes it assume that you're looking at their kid the wrong way, or that you're telling them that they're, having a mental health crisis, when really we're just trying to respond. And then I think the other piece is just having that community belief that we all want the same thing. It's a changing culture. It really is. I feel like everybody does have the same goal to keep everyone safe, but sometimes that lack of communication thereof, or the information sharing, sometimes the sharing of information gets a little scary, and you need that in order to have this successful model. You need to be able to communicate with your law enforcement partners and your mental health people, and share that information. I think the Clara Davis Act really does help with that, but I do think that there could be some improvement there.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Joe, you kind of took the lead on convincing your boss and some folks to go with this. What was the bumpy road that you had warned people, hey, look out for this, but it can be overcome? And what challenges did you overcome, or do you still face?
The biggest one is kind of like Kevin talked about, was making sure that you have a data collection system prior to being started that talks about making sure you're capturing, race, gender, all those things, so you can be accountable to not only your district community, but to your community at large. Make sure that you can report out to make sure that things are fair and equitable, and that you're doing this as a student support, not as a model of enforcement. That is the biggest challenge ever. So that data collection piece, we use a Google form, which is huge. And if any of you want to see that, we can share some of that. We have enough data now that we can share that without breaking privacy of students. But you also see that we're being fair and equitable with all of our student populations. In addition to that, kind of like Kevin also talked about, is making sure you have the right personnel for these roles. One of the things we do here in Thompson is we also have an MOU in addition to our IGA. So all of our SROs that are brought in or clinicians are interviewed by a panel, not only of myself and representatives from law enforcement, but with mental health, school administrator, and student representation on the panel. I'm not talking about kids that are in StuCo and on the football team, kids that are truly representative of a student population. And that's how we bring those personnel in.
Thanks, Joe. We have 3 different questions that have popped on the Jamboard, and Thompson crew, they're all for you, but I'm going to ask everybody to feel free to weigh in. And actually, I guess 2 of them are. One of them is for the whole group. To the folks from Thompson School District, folks were asking about the comment about holding families accountable for getting kids to services, as well as some questions around working with students on re-entry and what the approach is to working directly maybe with the teachers in addition to others. Brendan and Michelle, I'll let it up to you to jump into either of those. And then the question I'll throw to anybody, if you're familiar, whether it's Kevin, Joe, or Brendan, Michelle, funding. How do you get this going if you've been involved in that side of it? But anybody from Thompson want to tackle the questions about re-entry or about getting families involved in getting the services?
So I think that as far as the re-entry process goes, we're working out some of the kinks on when and when not to, since it's just us. Sometimes it's hard to be everywhere, but we definitely work closely with safety and security, and we've gotten to build a lot of those relationships with some of our school admin, so they'll reach out to us if they have concerns, or we might have had some calls with a particular student and we jump in and say, hey, we know they're coming out of a hospital, or we know that they're coming off of a suspension. How can we help support? And we want to be a part of those conversations so that we can work together and continue to work on that collaboration. I think that goes the same with teachers. We try to talk to students and teachers as much as we can, and be there as that proactive. And that's what I kept hearing too, is everybody working on the proactive side of realizing that we're not just here like, oh no, everybody's in trouble and bad things are happening. You know, they showed up at the school today, but walking around and getting to know the teachers, and teachers will reach out and give us feedback as well. I think that there's also the point too, we don't want too many people at the table intimidating students when we're trying to have those conversations. So sometimes we walk into a room and we go, wow, there's a lot of people in here. Who do you feel comfortable keeping, and who are we taking out of this conversation? And putting that back on the student can help empower them to be open, honest, and communicate their needs most effectively. The funding piece is all Joe.
Okay. Joe, I'll go to you, and you get the Brendan, jump in, please.
I was just going to touch about the holding families accountable. So we've really built a strong relationship with some of the providers that are directly in our community. And we have a good referral system where hey, we have this kid coming down this way. Expect them for an admission, intake appointment or something along those lines. So they usually tell us yep, they attended the intake appointment. And then sometimes we can relay that back to the school if the school's wanting to know. Specifics can't be shared with us. We can't be well, what do they talk about at the intake appointment? It's just kind of keeping that checklist, hey, we're sending the student your way, this is why. And then once they hit their table and they're yep, they attended the intake, thank you. That's kind of about where we get with that stuff. If they haven't, then sometimes we'll reach out to families and say, hey, we talked about this. Are you guys struggling with payment? Are you struggling with insurance providers? To see if there's something more going on that we can help assess that situation and help families out. We've connected families before and got grant funded counseling. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can get involved. It's just knowing who's available to us, having conversations with them so they understand who we are, what we do, and then the same for them. We want to understand what your services are available, what it looks like, and what age range are you filling those services with. So, and
I'm just going to add very quickly, I think one of the smartest things coming onto the team that was thought through was information sharing and how that works. SROs don't have access to IEPs and those types of things, but I do. So it doesn't mean that I am spewing all the information that I'm reading on my computer to Brendan, but I'm going in informed. I'm going in with a certain picture. And that can help because I can say, hold on, like I can't necessarily tell you the ins and outs of everything, but this is the approach that I think would be best for the situation. And so it works well to kind of overcome some of those red tape barriers that we're seeing become more and more of an issue when we're trying to support students.
Thank you both, truly. And Joe, this next piece, we could probably do an hour on the funding. I'm up against the clock and doing some closing announcements. I would love a minute or two from you of how you approached it and any quick words you would have for folks. And I'll probably invite you back if you'll have us for another conversation.
Correct. The funding piece is a whole other conversation. What I will say is the best thing you can do is market it. And I actually have evidence to prove it. You would be shocked at the amount of cops and clinicians that want to do this work and want to help because it's prevention, right? We give the kids the support that they need now, so we're not seeing them in a negative way in the community later. My best example of that is I have a waiting list of SROs who want Brennan's job. And then currently we're hiring a second clinician for our team. And I believe last time we checked, we had 26 applicants for one position, which I know right now is unheard of. So it's amazing when you invest in people and then you market the work that this group is doing and the amount of people that want to be part of that. I think Brendan has written one ticket and it was actually not even to a kid, it was to a traffic violation. And they have over 200 calls for service. So just making sure when cops hear that I can just go and be a support, and same with clinicians, then the work speaks for itself and then they will apply.
Well, and to piggyback real quick off of Joe, like when we go into a room, we tell kids you're not in trouble. Whatever is said between us stays between us. And that helps a lot of kids struggling with substances. We're like, we're here to connect you with services. You have a building SRO that's assigned to this school that deals with those kinds of things. But for us to come in and say, hey, whatever happens here, we're here to support you and help you and get you connected if you want help is super huge. And I know we talked about it earlier. There's some kids that just don't feel comfortable with law enforcement. And we tell the kids, if you want anybody in this room to go away, including myself, I make that very known to them. I will step out of the room. And there's times that we've done that and it's helped us build trust and rapport over time where these kids are now high-fiving me and talking to me and are comfortable speaking with me. It's a lot of work. But in that crisis situation, I do everything I can to obviously keep Michelle safe because that's my priority. But once that job's done, I can step out of the room and let Michelle take over and do everything. So
thank you for making that point. And Joe, it's a remarkable point that you have a backlog of people that want the jobs. Somebody had made the point in the Jamboard of how do you find the people? And I think you've answered that. I am unfortunately up against the clock here. I'm probably going to invite all of you back. And I know we've got folks that would love to talk with you. So we'll get with you about sharing some of that information. But our true thanks to all of you for giving your time to share your experience here. I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat unrelated to the conversation we just had. But because I want to hand it over to my friend Sue, my partner on all of this work, to close us out, I'm going to drop, there's 2 links I'll be dropping in. One is to the op-ed I mentioned in the Colorado Sun about this work going around in school safety that I hope you all will take a look at and help spread. The other is one of our members, Wendy Loloff Cooper from Generation Schools, is leading the Justice Engaged students, and they've got a listening tour going on. They've got a couple meetings coming up, one in Los Animas, one in Greeley, some others to be scheduled. So I'm going to drop a link to those in there. And then Sue, I'm going to hand it to you to close us out.
Okay, thank you, my friend, and I will do it in less than a minute. But Kevin, it's nice to finally meet you. It took this. So I just want to say to each of our amazing contributors today that I am at the Colorado School Finance convening, and sometimes, you know, we feel like we're insane because we're not making any progress with school funding. And then I came and did this convening today, and I feel so optimistic, and I feel so filled with hope that we can continue to ground this convening and each one of ourselves in our professional journeys in this optimism that we do have solutions. And we have solutions we heard today that students are coming up with. We have solutions that Kevin, Joe, Stacy, Brendan, and Michelle have come up with. So we're not starting from square one, and we know things are working in pockets, and it's our job then to shine a bright light on the examples that you share with us today. So I just say thank you for the hope that you've given me and each one of us in our collective future, as well as the concrete and tangible examples you shared that we could then make into tangible recommendations. So thank you. I really, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. I'm very touched.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate everybody. As we always do, we're going to get notes. We'll follow up with everybody by email. The video and the materials from today's call will be up on the website, saferschoolsinitiative.org/Colorado. You should have those links in the chat. We will see everybody again October 30th at 3:30 p.m., where we'll talk about incident responses as well as a number of other topics. Thank you all for giving your time to make this work possible. We'll be in touch soon. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.